Shalom, welcome to Rob on the Rock. I'm Rob Van Hoff. Happy Pesach. Here we are on the 14th of Nisan, and I wanted to look at a few terms. One is Oni, Ayin Nun Yod. Oni, it means affliction or oppression. And we learn from Deuteronomy 16 verse 3 that matzot, or unleavened bread, is called lechem oni. And the Greek word uses the word artos here for bread. It's just a regular word for bread. But we understand that lechem oni, bread of affliction, is matzot, or unleavened bread, as we call it in English. What we're looking at here on the screen is an image from the Washington Pentateuch. And I want to just, this is from Exodus 3, the scene where Moses sees the burning bush. And I want to read to you, I think this is verse 7 here. God introduces himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses is afraid. It says, Ki yareh mechabit el ha-Elohim. He's afraid to look at Elohim. And then it says here, Vayomer Adonai, Ra'o ra'iti et oni ami. Ra'o ra'iti, that is, seeing I have seen. And it's like, verily I have seen, or I have most assuredly seen. Ra'o ra'iti et oni ami. So the oni is the affliction, ami, of my people. Asher be Mitzrayim, who are in Egypt. Ve'et tza'akatam, their tza'aka, their cry, shamati. I have heard their cry. Now, what we see then is the oni, the affliction, the tza'aka, the outcry that God is aware of. He's seen and heard. So why did God allow them to be in Egypt in the first place? If we look back to Genesis 15, we see that God told Avram at that time, that he would die in Shalom, but that many generations later his children would be slaves in a foreign land, but that God would bring them back. So God has allowed Israel, his children, the children of Israel, to be in Egypt and to suffer, to actually experience this oni, and to have tza'aka, to cry out to him. And so he knows that, of course, it's time that he is going to deliver them, and he's going to redeem them from Egypt, from their affliction. And part of the commandment for the Pesach, or the Pascha in Aramaic, is to eat this lechem oni, this bread of affliction. It's a memory of this affliction. Now, we're going to leave this manuscript here, and we're going to go to a sheet here to talk about some key terms. And one of the terms we're going to look at here is ger, gimel resh, like this, with the tzere. And the other is eved, ayin, bet, dalet, and it's a segelet, like this. And ger, the one on the right, means sojourner or stranger. Eved means slave. And what we're looking at here is a phrase in Hebrew, ki gerim heitem. Ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. For you were gerim, for you were sojourners or strangers in the land of Egypt. And we're going to look at all the places that occurs in the Torah, and we're going to see how God uses that fact, the fact of Israel's experience, firsthand experience of that affliction, of that oni, of which the matzah reminds us. We'll just look at these occurrences. Exodus 22:21. You shall not wrong a sojourner, that's the word ger, or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You were strangers, you were gerim. It's the phrase that we see up above here. Ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. 23:9 of Exodus. You shall not oppress a ger, a stranger, for you know the heart of the stranger, for you were sojourners, or gerim. These are all, even though it's sojourner here, this all means, it's all gerim in Hebrew. So God leverages the fact of their firsthand experience in a difficult trial to anchor the truth of his covenant love, how it's expressed in his Torah. Leviticus 19:34. You shall treat the ger, the stranger who sojourns with you, as the native among you. You shall love him as yourself. For you were gerim in the land of Egypt. I am Adonai, your God. Isn't that amazing? And here in the book of Deuteronomy, love the ger. Therefore, for you were sojourners, you were gerim in the land of Egypt. So you could take each of these verses and look up the larger context to get in more into the real good, meaty connotations with respect to the specific commandments. But you see here the general picture. Okay, the other word we're going to look at is eved, and we have a recurring, just like we have the recurring phrase that we just saw, ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, you were gerim. So we have ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim, for you were a slave, you were an eved in the land of Egypt. And this word also, eved, or slave, or servant, is also leveraged, but only in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is unique. Now, Deuteronomy has, as we just saw, a reference to Israel being gerim, and to remember that. But most of what we see in Deuteronomy is the eved phrase. You shall remember that you were an eved in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Adonai your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So the Sabbath day commandment is anchored in the truth of Israel having that affliction in the land of Egypt. Deuteronomy 5:15, here's another one. You shall remember that you were an eved, a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God redeemed you. Therefore I command you this today. Again, you can go and look at the specifics. 16:12, you shall remember that you were an eved, a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. And Deuteronomy 24:18, you shall remember that you were an eved. This is the same phrase. Ki eved hayita be'Mitzrayim, and Adonai your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I commanded you to do this. And finally, Deuteronomy 24:22, you shall remember that you were an eved in the land of Mitzrayim. Therefore I commanded you to do this. Okay, so we saw it both for ger, we saw it for eved, that these are terms that encapsulate for Israel a memory, a first-person memory of this oni, of this affliction. And anchored on that first-person memory, that identification with the difficulties, with the trial, with the mistreatment, with the oppression, whether it's in terms of slavery or being a stranger, that is a core memory upon which God leverages his commandment, that his commandments are always good, and there is an empathy that is learned in identifying with this memory so that you will not treat an eved or a ger in a way that is contrary to God's law, rather that you will love the stranger as you love yourself. So this shows us about the heart of God. The heart of God is to recognize that the stranger or the slave are in a temporarily marginal position, or maybe even their whole life they could be a slave or a ger, but they are at a disadvantage. They are vulnerable. They are at the margins of society. They don't have much power, and so they are vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. And of course, this is absolutely against the heart of God to abuse or to oppress such people, or any people for that matter. So back to our basic big picture here with the two words here, ger and eved. And my suggestion is that this word oni, affliction, that we see in both, we see it in Exodus 3, like we just saw. It's in Deuteronomy 16:3. The lechem oni is the bread of affliction, the matzah. That during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when we're eating the matzah, we're remembering this is the bread of affliction, and there's a humility associated with that. It's the opposite of pride. A person who is remembering that they themselves were a slave, they themselves were a stranger. That's the person who has humility and won't puff up and imagine that they are somehow something they're not, but rather they will have sober-mindedness, as the Apostle Paul puts it, or humility, the unleavened bread, as Paul puts it, of sincerity and truth. So just some other Hebrew terms here that are worth pausing and meditating upon in their context as we reflect on the Pesach and the meaning of our redemption and the meaning of matzah specifically. All right, Chag Sameach, Shalom.